My dog died 5 years ago, but last night he came back. We buried him right here, but the grave wasn't empty. That closet hadn't opened in years until that night. The collar we buried with him was back inside the house. My dad said something that night I'll never forget.
5 years is a long time to miss something that never really leaves you. I was 17 when Rusty died. He wasn't anything special, just a golden mutt we got from a shelter when I was 9. But Rusty followed me everywhere. School mornings, late-night walks, fishing trips with my dad. He was always there. The kind of dog that slept at the foot of your bed like it was his job. Then one October afternoon, he got out. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside town, the kind where cars pass maybe once every 10 minutes, but it only takes one. I still remember the sound, tires screeching, a thud, my mom screaming my name from the porch. Rusty didn't make it. Dad buried him himself behind the old maple tree at the edge of our yard. No marker, just a flat stone and a small hole in the dirt where the ground never seemed to settle right. For months, I kept expecting to hear his nails tapping across the hardwood floor. Eventually, life moved on. College, work, a different car, different friends. The house stayed the same, though. Same creaky stairs, same drafty windows, same backyard with that maple tree standing like a quiet reminder of something buried and forgotten. Or, at least, that's what I thought. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. Cold for early fall, wind pushing dead leaves across the driveway. I had just gotten home from work around 9:30 and the porch light was flickering again. Dad never fixed anything unless it was completely broken. I was halfway to the front door when I heard it. A low whine. Soft. Almost nervous. I froze. At first, I thought it was coming from the neighbor's yard. Then I heard it again. Closer. Right behind me. I turned slowly. And there he was. Standing near the edge of the yard. Half hidden in the shadows under the maple tree. A dog. Golden fur. Medium size. Tail wagging slow, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. My brain tried to make sense of it. Stray dog? Neighbor's dog? Someone's lost pet? But then he stepped forward into the porch light. Same white patch on the chest. Same bent left ear. Same scar above the eye from when he ran into a fence as a puppy. My stomach dropped, because I knew that dog. I whispered before I even realized I was speaking. Rusty? The dog tilted his head and wagged his tail faster, exactly the way Rusty used to. 5 years after we buried him. And what scared me the most was that the dirt under the maple tree looked freshly disturbed. But when I walked closer, I realized something even worse. The hole wasn't empty. Something was still buried inside. I stood there staring at the ground longer than I want to admit. The dirt under the maple tree looked wrong. Not dug up exactly, just uneven, like something underneath had shifted. The flat stone my dad placed there years ago had tilted sideways, half sunk into the soil, and Rusty was standing right next to it, watching me. His tail wagged, slow, steady, like he'd been waiting. Every logical part of my brain was screaming the same thing. This isn't possible. Dogs don't come back. Not after 5 years. Not after you watched them get buried. Still, I stepped closer. "Hey, buddy," I said quietly, my voice shaking more than I liked. Rusty moved toward me like no time had passed, no hesitation, no fear, just that same familiar trot I remembered from childhood. When he reached me, he pressed his head against my hand. Warm, solid, real. I ran my fingers through his fur. Same rough texture, same faint line along his back where the fur grew in 2 directions. Even the same smell, that dusty, outdoor dog smell I hadn't noticed in years, but somehow recognized instantly. My chest tightened. It felt like getting a piece of my life back, and at the same time like something was deeply wrong. Because Rusty never barked much, but when he was happy, he'd make this low little grunt sound in his throat. And he was doing it now, exactly the same. I swallowed hard and looked back down at the grave. The dirt had small cracks running through it, like the ground had dried and split. Without really thinking about it, I nudged the soil with my shoe. It shifted easier than it should have. Loose. Too loose. Rusty suddenly stopped wagging his tail. I felt it before I noticed it, that strange quiet animals get when something isn't right. When I looked down at him, his ears were pulled back. Not scared, alert, watching me, like he didn't want me touching the ground. I stepped back. Okay, I muttered. Rusty relaxed almost instantly. That was the first moment something truly unsettled me. It felt less like I had found Rusty, and more like Rusty had found me. I took him inside anyway. I don't even remember deciding to do it. It just felt natural, like muscle memory. I opened the back door and he walked in without hesitation, nails clicking across the kitchen floor exactly the way I remembered. My mom was already asleep upstairs. Dad was working a night shift, so it was just me and a dog that shouldn't exist. Rusty walked straight into the living room. Then he stopped, right in front of the hallway, staring, not moving, just staring into the darkness like someone was standing there. Rusty? No reaction. Then slowly, very slowly, he let out a low growl. Not loud, not aggressive, just deep and uneasy. Rusty almost never growled, not in the 10 years we had him. But that wasn't the worst part, because a second later, I heard a sound coming from the hallway. A soft scrape, like something dragging across the floor. And Rusty wasn't looking at the hallway entrance. He was looking at the closet door at the very end, the closet that had been locked since the night Rusty died. And then, the handle slowly moved.
The closet door handle barely moved at first, just a tiny shift, like someone testing it from the inside. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, wood settles, pipes shift, the kind of excuses you reach for when your brain doesn't want the truth. But Rusty knew better. His body stiffened beside me, ears forward, eyes locked on that door. Another sound came from the hallway, a faint click. The handle turned a little farther. My throat went dry. That closet hadn't been opened in years. My mom used it for storage, old boxes, winter coats, things nobody touched. At some point, the lock jammed, and my dad said he'd fix it eventually. He never did. As far as I knew, the only key was lost. And yet, the handle turned again. Slow, deliberate. Rusty stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of me. Not aggressive, protective. I hadn't seen him do that since I was a kid. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet house. Nothing answered, but the handle stopped moving. For a moment, everything went completely still. No wind outside, no creaks in the walls. No sound except Rusty's slow breathing. Then, thump. From inside the closet. I jumped. Rusty barked once, sharp and sudden. That was when the door jerked. Not open, just a violent shake like something hit it from the inside. I stumbled backward. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This isn't real. This is not real. Rusty didn't move. He just stared, low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Then, silence again. 30 seconds passed, maybe a minute, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough for me to convince myself I needed to check. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the same dented metal one Dad kept for power outages. By the time I came back, Rusty was sitting in front of the closet, waiting, like he knew I would. My hands shook as I aimed the light down the hallway. The beam hit the door. The handle was still. The door closed tight. Everything normal. Too normal. I walked closer. Each step sounded louder than the last. Rusty stayed right beside me. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Then I grabbed the handle. Cold metal. I turned it slowly. It moved. Smooth. Unlocked. That alone made my stomach drop, because that door hadn't opened in years. I pulled. The door creaked open just a few inches. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam. Old coats, boxes, nothing moving, nothing alive, just storage. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. I pushed the door open wider. That's when Rusty started whining. Not loud, not scared, just urgent, like he wanted me to stop. I ignored it and swung the door all the way open. The closet was empty except for the boxes and coats, but one thing immediately stood out. Something sitting on the floor, right in the center, where nothing had been before. A small wooden box, old, scratched, with dirt smeared across the lid. And sitting on top of it was Rusty's collar, the same red collar we buried him with, still caked in dried soil. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold, because engraved on the metal tag were words I had never seen before, and Rusty began growling the moment I read them.
Rusty's growl changed the second I picked up the collar. It wasn't just uneasy anymore. It was warning, deep and sharp, vibrating through his chest in a way I had never heard before, not even when strangers came to the house years ago. "Easy, boy," I whispered, but Rusty didn't relax. He kept staring at the collar in my hand like it didn't belong there, like it shouldn't exist. My fingers felt stiff as I turned the metal tag toward the flashlight beam. The front looked normal. Worn edges, scratches from years of use, and Rusty's name engraved in the same simple lettering, Rusty. Underneath it, the old phone number we disconnected years ago. Everything exactly the way I remembered. For a second, I almost laughed from the tension. Maybe someone dug it up, kids messing around, some weird prank. But then I turned the tag over, and that's when my stomach dropped, because the back of the tag had writing on it, small letters, scratched in uneven lines like they'd been carved by hand, not engraved by a machine, carved. It said, "He wasn't the one we buried." My hands went numb. I stared at the words, reading them again and again like maybe they'd change. They didn't. Behind me, Rusty let out a sharp whine. I turned toward him. His eyes weren't on me. They were on the closet again. That same tense stillness had come back into his body, like he could hear something I couldn't. The air in the hallway suddenly felt colder. Not normal cold, that heavy kind of cold that makes your skin tighten. Then I noticed something else. The wooden box. It wasn't fully closed. The lid sat slightly crooked, like it had been shut in a hurry.
I didn't want to open it. Every instinct said leave it alone, but curiosity pulled harder than fear. I set the collar down on the shelf and knelt on the floor. Rusty moved closer, pressing against my side, not trying to stop me, just staying close, like he knew what was coming. Slowly, I lifted the lid. The hinges creaked softly. Inside the box were old photographs, dozens of them, loose, faded, edges curled with age. I picked up the first one. It showed our backyard, the maple tree, fresh dirt piled into a mound, the day we buried Rusty. But something was wrong, very wrong, because in the photo, my dad was kneeling beside the grave, holding a shovel, and next to him stood a man I had never seen before, tall, thin, face half hidden under a baseball cap, watching, just watching. I flipped to the next picture. Same day, different angle. My mom standing on the porch, me near the tree, Dad filling the grave, and that same stranger in the background, closer now, too close. My pulse started racing because I knew one thing for certain. No one else had been there that day. No neighbors, no friends, just us. But the worst part wasn't the stranger. It was what Dad was lowering into the grave. Because it wasn't Rusty. It was a black plastic bag, about the size of a person. And just as I realized that, Rusty suddenly started barking at the front door, wild, panicked, like someone was trying to get inside. Then came 3 loud knocks, slow, heavy, and a voice I recognized immediately. My dad, but he wasn't supposed to be home for another 4 hours. And then he said something that made my blood turn cold. Don't open the door. That thing inside isn't your dog.
For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Rusty kept barking at the front door, sharp, frantic bursts that echoed through the house, but all I could hear were my dad's words repeating in my head. Don't open the door. That thing inside isn't your dog. Inside, not outside, inside. Slowly, I turned around. Rusty stood near the hallway entrance, body rigid, staring straight at me. Not at the door anymore, at me. His barking had stopped. Now he was just watching, tail completely still, eyes locked onto mine in a way that made my chest tighten. For the first time that night, something felt wrong about him. Not obvious, not dramatic, just small things. The way he didn't blink, the way his breathing sounded too slow, too steady, like he was waiting. Another knock hit the door, harder this time. "Son," my dad shouted, "open the door!" Rusty's ears twitched, but he didn't look away from me. I backed toward the front door slowly, step by step. Rusty followed, silent, close enough that I could hear his nails tap against the floor behind me. When I reached the door, my hand hovered over the lock. "It's me," Dad said again. "You're not safe in there." My fingers trembled as I turned the deadbolt. The door opened. Dad stepped inside fast and slammed it shut behind him. His face looked pale under the porch light, eyes wide, breathing heavy like he'd been running. Then he saw Rusty and froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dad whispered, "Oh, God." Rusty tilted his head, exactly the way he used to. Dad slowly shook his head. No, that's not him." I swallowed. "The grave? The pictures? What is going on?" Dad looked at me like he'd been dreading this moment for years. Then he said quietly, "The dog that got hit by the car wasn't Rusty." The room felt like it tilted. "What?" Dad ran a hand over his face. "That night, after the accident,
I went back outside to move him before you saw. My heart pounded, but when I got there, the body was gone." Silence filled the room. Dad continued, "I thought an animal dragged him off, or maybe he wasn't dead and crawled away." My mouth went dry. "So what did we bury?" Dad didn't answer right away. He just looked toward the hallway, toward the closet. Finally, he said, "I found that bag near the tree the next morning." My stomach dropped. "What bag?" Dad's voice barely came out above a whisper. "The one in the pictures." Neither of us spoke. Slowly, we both turned toward Rusty. He was sitting calmly in the middle of the room, watching us. Then something happened I will never forget. Rusty walked forward, not toward me, toward my dad. He stopped just inches away, looked up at him, and wagged his tail. Slow, gentle, familiar. Dad's face drained of color, because Rusty made that same happy grunt sound in his throat, the one only Rusty ever made. Dad whispered, "That's impossible." Then Rusty walked past him, down the hallway, toward the closet. The closet door slowly creaked open by itself, and Rusty stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him completely. The door closed, soft, quiet. When I forced myself to open it a minute later, the closet was empty. No dog, no box, no collar, nothing. We checked the backyard before sunrise. The maple tree looked untouched, flat stone back in place, perfect soil, like nothing had ever been buried there. Dad sold the house 3 months later. We never talked about that night again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear a sound outside my apartment door, soft scratching, followed by a quiet, familiar whine. And every time I look through the peephole, there's nothing there, except one thing: fresh dirt smudged across the floor.